Everyone is talking about Chelsea's spending. Everyone is debating their transfers. Everyone thinks they know Chelsea's plan. But almost nobody is asking the one question that actually matters. What if Chelsea aren't rebuilding? What if they're building the next Premier League dynasty? Because when you stop looking at the transfer fees, when you stop chasing the headlines, and when you step back to see the entire picture, something unexpected starts to appear. Not chaos. Not another billionaire spending spree. A blueprint. Every signing, every contract, every sale, every decision fits into the same long-term plan. And if that plan works, the Premier League could be about to witness its biggest power shift since Manchester City's rise. Because this isn't the Chelsea that finished outside Europe. That Chelsea is already gone. The real story is only beginning. Missing out on European football should have forced Chelsea into survival mode. Most clubs would have reduced spending, sold their best players, delayed the rebuild. Chelsea did the exact opposite. Instead of pressing the brakes, they accelerated. Not because they were desperate, because they already knew exactly what they wanted to become. There would be no panic buying, no short-term fixes, no famous names arriving simply to sell shirts. Every decision would point toward one destination: building the next great Chelsea dynasty. And once the first pieces started falling into place, the rest of Europe quietly began paying attention. First came João Pedro, then Pedro Neto, then Estevao, then one of Europe's most highly rated teenage defenders, João Almeida. The midfield already contained Enzo Fernandez, Moises Caicedo, Romeo Lavia, players young enough to grow together, yet experienced enough to compete immediately. Behind them, Levi Colwill, Reece James, Robert Sanchez, Cole Palmer. A squad that suddenly looked less like a rebuilding project and more like the early foundations of something genuinely frightening. But Chelsea weren't finished. Because then, everything changed. The phone call started. Arsenal wanted him. Several Champions League clubs wanted him. Most people assumed Chelsea couldn't possibly pull it off. No European football, financial restrictions, an unfinished project. Why would one of England's brightest stars choose Stamford Bridge? Then, the announcement arrived. Morgan Rogers, Chelsea, for a club record fee. The biggest transfer in Chelsea history. Even bigger than Moises Caicedo. Even bigger than Enzo Fernandez. The entire football world stopped. Not because Chelsea had spent money. Everyone expected that. But because they had convinced one of the Premier League's most sought-after players to reject almost everyone else. Suddenly, people stopped laughing at Chelsea's rebuild. They started fearing it. Morgan Rogers isn't simply another talented attacker. That's the mistake people keep making. Last season he produced goals, assists, match-winning performances. But statistics only tell half the story. Watch him closely, and you'll notice something different. Defenders rarely know where he's going. One body feint, one explosive touch, one change of direction. Suddenly he's gone. He doesn't only beat defenders. He manipulates them. He forces entire defensive lines to collapse before delivering the final pass or taking the shot himself. Strong enough to protect possession. Fast enough to attack open space. Creative enough to unlock deep blocks. Clinical enough to finish the move himself. Modern football doesn't produce many players with that complete profile. Chelsea knew it. Which is exactly why they were willing to break their transfer record. But here's what makes this signing even more dangerous. Chelsea didn't buy Morgan Rogers for today's team. They bought him for Xabi Alonso's team. And once you understand how Xabi Alonso builds football teams, everything Chelsea have done suddenly starts making perfect sense. Because Rogers was never the destination. He was only the beginning. Xabi Alonso has never believed in collecting superstars. He believes in building systems. And that's exactly why Chelsea's transfer strategy suddenly looks completely different from everyone else's. At Bayer Leverkusen, people remember the unbeaten season, the Bundesliga title, the domestic double. But those trophies were only the final chapter. The real masterpiece, was how Alonso transformed ordinary talent into one perfectly synchronized machine. Every player understood exactly where to stand, exactly when to press, exactly when to attack. Nobody played for themselves. Everybody played for the system. That's why Florian Wirtz exploded into one of Europe's biggest stars. That's why Jeremy Frimpong became almost unstoppable. That's why Granit Xhaka looked 10 years younger. Alonso didn't reinvent football. He simply made every player better than they had ever looked before. And now, he's about to inherit arguably the youngest elite squad in England. Look carefully at Chelsea's recruitment. It's impossible to ignore the pattern. Every signing fits the same profile. Young, athletic, technically secure, positionally intelligent, capable of playing multiple roles. This isn't random spending. It's recruitment designed around one football philosophy. Marco Palestra arrives as one of Italy's brightest attacking fullbacks. Giovanni Quinda already understands the wingback role despite his age. Joel Hato can operate both centrally and wide. Morgan Rogers plays almost anywhere across the front line. None of them were signed because of reputation. They were signed because they fit the puzzle. And once those puzzle pieces connect, Chelsea become terrifying. Then there's Cole Palmer, perhaps the biggest winner of all. Under Alonso, creative players don't stay glued to one position. They float. They appear where defenders least expect them. Exactly the role Florian Wirtz mastered at Leverkusen. Now imagine Palmer operating with Rogers making diagonal runs, João Pedro constantly dropping between the lines, Pedro Neto stretching the pitch, while overlapping wingbacks attack from both sides. Defenders won't know who to follow. Midfielders won't know who to mark. One hesitation, and Chelsea will already be behind them. That's exactly how Alonso's football suffocates opponents. Not through chaos, through perfectly organized movement. But here's the detail almost nobody is talking about. Chelsea won't have Champions League football this season. Most fans see that as a disadvantage. Alonso probably sees the opposite. Because while Manchester City, Liverpool, Arsenal, and others travel across Europe every week, Chelsea stay home. Training. Improving. Repeating the same tactical patterns again, and again, and again. Sometimes, the biggest advantage isn't playing more football. It's having more time to build the team that eventually beats everyone else. And that's exactly why one signing matters even more than the rest. Not because he cost the most. Not because he's the biggest name. Because he changes how every other player performs. Morgan Rogers isn't joining Chelsea to become the hero. He's joining to become the connector. The player who turns possession into penetration, control into chances, and pressure into goals. That's a completely different responsibility. During his final season at Aston Villa, Rogers didn't simply collect goals and assists. He terrified defenders. Not with tricks for the sake of entertainment, but with relentless, purposeful carries. Every time he received the ball, he drove forward. Every touch forced defenders to retreat. Every run created panic. The numbers were impressive. The eye test was even better. Because Rogers possesses something modern football desperately values, the ability to eliminate 2 or 3 defenders without needing a single pass. Very few players can do that consistently. At just 23 years old, Chelsea have signed one of them. Now imagine the picture Alonso is already seeing. Cole Palmer drifting between midfield and attack. Morgan Rogers attacking the half space. João Pedro pulling centre-backs out of position. Pedro Neto stretching the defensive line. Quinda flying beyond them. Suddenly, defenders aren't facing one problem. They're facing 5. And that's exactly how Alonso's best teams work. Not by relying on one superstar, but by creating impossible decisions. If a defender steps toward Palmer, Rogers attacks the space behind him. If they stop Rogers, João Pedro drops into midfield. If they close the middle, the wingbacks are already arriving on the outside. Every movement creates another problem. Every solution opens another weakness. It's football played 3 passes ahead. That's why Chelsea's spending suddenly looks far less reckless than people think. Most clubs buy talented footballers. Chelsea appear to be buying tactical profiles. There's a huge difference. One builds a squad. The other builds an identity. And identities last much longer than transfer windows. But every great rebuild comes with difficult conversations. Because while new stars were arriving through the front door, several familiar faces quietly discovered their Chelsea careers were already over. Building a dynasty isn't only about who you sign. It's also about who you're willing to let go. And Chelsea made one thing painfully clear. Nobody was untouchable. Not reputations. Not transfer fees. Not fan favorites. If you didn't fit Xabi Alonso's football, you simply didn't fit Chelsea's future. Philip Jorgensen, Axel Disasi, Benoit Badiashile, Alejandro Garnacho, Liam Delap. One after another, they were told the same message. The project was moving forward. With or without them. It sounded ruthless. Because it was. But every great manager eventually reaches this point. Pep Guardiola did it. Jurgen Klopp did it. Jose Mourinho certainly did it. The hardest part of building an elite team isn't signing players. It's making difficult decisions before everyone else realizes they're necessary. And Chelsea weren't building a squad based on sentiment. They were building one around identity. One built on energy, versatility, intensity, and absolute tactical discipline. Because Alonso wasn't trying to assemble the biggest collection of stars. He was trying to assemble 11 players who could move, think, and press, as one. And once that happens, talent becomes something far more dangerous. It becomes unstoppable. But here's the biggest question. Can Chelsea actually become great again? Because history tells us something important. Chelsea have never been successful because of one player, one manager, or one transfer window. They have always risen when the club found the perfect balance between ambition and identity. And that identity was built through decades of impossible moments. From their first league title in 1955, to the battles of the 1970 FA Cup final, to Jose Mourinho walking into Stamford Bridge and completely changing what Chelsea believed they could become. The special one didn't just bring tactics. He brought an attitude. Chelsea stopped hoping to win. They expected to win. That mentality created the generation of John Terry, Frank Lampard, Didier Drogba, and Petr Cech. A team that didn't simply defeat opponents, it broke them. Then came the European dreams. The heartbreak. The failures. The moments when people questioned whether Chelsea could ever conquer Europe. Until one night in Munich changed everything. Nobody believed they could beat Bayern in their own stadium. But Chelsea survived. They fought. They suffered. And Didier Drogba delivered one of the greatest moments in Champions League history. That has always been Chelsea's secret. They don't just win when everything goes perfectly. They win when everything is against them. And now, Xabi Alonso is trying to create that same mentality in a completely new generation. And if anyone understands what it takes to rebuild a winning culture, it's Xabi Alonso. Because before he ever became one of Europe's brightest young managers, he lived inside 3 football dynasties. He learned control from Pep Guardiola, discipline from Rafael Benitez, adaptability from Carlo Ancelotti. He wasn't just coached by great managers. He studied them. Every training session, every tactical meeting, every small adjustment that separated good teams from legendary ones. Now, Chelsea are giving him something none of those managers ever had at the beginning. A squad almost entirely built around his own ideas. No aging superstars demanding special treatment. No dressing room politics. No players signed for commercial reasons. Just young footballers willing to learn. And that's exactly the environment where Alonso has always produced his best work. At Bayer Leverkusen, he inherited uncertainty. At Chelsea, he's inheriting possibility. There's a massive difference. Because teaching talented players is difficult. Teaching hungry players is much easier. And Chelsea's squad is filled with footballers still chasing their biggest achievements. That's dangerous. Not only for the Premier League, but eventually for Europe. Because if Alonso succeeds, Chelsea won't simply improve. They'll grow together. Year after year. Window after window. Exactly the way Manchester City once did. Exactly the way Liverpool rebuilt under Klopp. And that possibility should make every rival extremely uncomfortable. The timing might be the most frightening part of all. Because while everyone else is chasing immediate success, Chelsea are thinking 5 years ahead. Look across the Premier League. Manchester City are slowly preparing for life after Kevin De Bruyne. Liverpool are entering another transition. Manchester United are still searching for consistency. Tottenham continue changing direction. Even Arsenal. despite becoming title challengers. Know this current squad won't stay together forever. Chelsea see that. And instead of reacting, they're preparing. By the time many of their rivals begin another rebuild, Chelsea's young core could already have 3 or 4 seasons together. That's how dynasties are created. Not overnight, but through patience, continuity, and trust in one clear football identity. That's exactly why Chelsea's owners have accepted criticism throughout this project. Because they were never building for headlines. They were building for dominance. The Club World Cup victory proved this squad already knows how to win together. Now Alonso's job is making them win consistently. If he succeeds. The frightening part isn't that Chelsea return to the Champions League. The frightening part is what happens after they get there. Because history shows, once Chelsea smells success, they rarely settle for just one trophy. So maybe the biggest mistake people are making is judging this Chelsea team by what they were, not by what they're becoming. Because this project isn't asking one question. Can Chelsea improve? That answer already feels obvious. The real question is far more uncomfortable. How long before they start winning everything again? Think about the names. Cole Palmer, Morgan Rogers, Estevao, Joao Pedro, Enzo Fernandez, Moises Caicedo, Joral Hado, Reece James. A squad with elite talent. Most of them nowhere near their peak. Now place one of Europe's most respected tactical minds above them. Give him months on the training ground. Give him players recruited specifically for his football. Give him ownership willing to back every decision. Suddenly, this doesn't look like another rebuild. It looks like the beginning of something much bigger. Maybe Chelsea won't win the Premier League this season. Maybe they won't dominate immediately. But that's almost missing the point. Because dynasties don't announce themselves the day they're born. People only recognize them after they've already started collecting trophies. And that's exactly why the Premier League should be paying attention. Chelsea aren't rebuilding to compete. They're rebuilding to make the rest of Europe fear them again. The revolution has already started. Most people just haven't realized it yet.